The first time my husband begged me for a second chance, he was standing outside a glass office building he couldn't enter because security had already been told not to let him upstairs. And the strangest part wasn't seeing Daniel in the rain with his wrinkled blue shirt clinging to his skin or hearing the panic in his voice after 8 months of silence. It was realizing I felt absolutely nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Nothing. 8 months earlier, he had leaned against our kitchen counter on March 14th at exactly 9:26 p.m., loosened his tie, and calmly explained that he needed more life than a 42-year-old wife who spent Friday nights answering work emails and falling asleep before midnight. 2 days later, he moved into a downtown apartment with a 26-year-old Pilates instructor named Ava, drained our joint savings account except for $4,200, transferred the Mercedes into his name, and left divorce papers beside the espresso machine like an unpaid utility bill. He honestly believed I would collapse after he left. What he never noticed, not once in 17 years, was that while he was busy replacing me, I had already started rebuilding myself in silence. By the second week after Daniel left, people had already started speaking to me differently, and that humiliation was somehow worse than the betrayal itself because it came wrapped in pity disguised as kindness. Neighbors lowered their voices when I checked the mail. My younger sister kept sending me starting over podcasts at 6 a.m., and one of Daniel's friends actually placed his hand on my shoulder during a charity dinner on April 2nd and said, "Men panic about aging sometimes," as if abandoning a 17-year marriage for a woman young enough to remember dial-up internet as a history lesson was some unavoidable midlife weather pattern. The worst moment came during mediation when Daniel's attorney slid a folder across the table listing our assets, and I noticed my husband had categorized the consulting work I'd been quietly building for 3 years as supplemental hobby income, despite the fact that 2 healthcare firms had already retained me privately under non-disclosure agreements worth more than his annual bonus. I remember staring at that sentence while Daniel avoided eye contact and checked his phone every few minutes, probably texting Ava, probably believing I still needed him to survive. What he didn't understand was that humiliation becomes dangerous when a quiet woman finally stops asking to be chosen. The morning after Daniel officially moved out, I sat alone at our kitchen island wearing one of his old Harvard Business School sweatshirts and opened the spreadsheet I had hidden inside a folder labeled Holiday Budget 2023. Because survival has a strange way of sharpening your focus when someone else mistakes your silence for weakness. At 7:14 a.m. on March 17th, while he was probably waking up beside Ava in that expensive downtown apartment overlooking Lake Shore Drive, I was reviewing contracts from 3 private medical networks that had spent the last 11 months quietly hiring me to restructure failing patient retention systems after I finished consulting projects at my regular operations job. Daniel never noticed because he had stopped asking about my work years ago, unless it directly affected his dinner schedule or dry cleaning. He liked telling people I was organized the same way people compliment hotel staff for folding towels correctly, and for a long time I convinced myself that being dependable was enough to deserve loyalty. But somewhere between forgotten anniversaries and conversations where he scrolled through his phone while I spoke, I started building something private. I enrolled in executive certification courses under my maiden name in September 2022, attended networking breakfasts before sunrise twice a week, and saved every consulting payment in a separate business account at First Northern Credit Union that he didn't know existed because the statements were digital only. The irony was that Daniel had always believed he was the ambitious one in our marriage simply because his confidence was louder. 2 weeks after he left, I received an email from Stoneridge Health Partners confirming a 12-month consulting contract worth $214,000. And I remember staring at the number while reheating leftover soup in complete silence because there was nobody left in the house to minimize my success anymore. Around the same time, Daniel began posting carefully staged photos online with Ava, rooftop cocktails, luxury gym mirrors, captions about finally choosing happiness written by a man who once forgot my birthday dinner because he stayed late entertaining clients at Morton's Steakhouse. People sent me screenshots constantly, usually accompanied by messages pretending to comfort me, while secretly collecting details for their own entertainment. I never responded. Instead, I spent April turning our guest bedroom into a workspace with soft gray walls, floor-to-ceiling shelving, and a framed copy of my MBA diploma that had spent 6 years hidden in a hallway nobody looked at. The divorce process moved quickly because Daniel was impatient and distracted, which benefited me more than he realized. During mediation on April 28, he pushed aggressively to keep the condo and investment portfolio, assuming I would fight emotionally and exhaust myself trying to preserve appearances. But I agreed almost immediately after my attorney quietly slid me updated market projections showing commercial property opportunities expanding near the Northern Business District. Daniel mistook my calmness for defeat. That was his favorite mistake. By May, Ava had started appearing beside him at industry events, wearing white dresses and touching his arm every time another woman approached him. And I heard through mutual friends that Daniel was telling people I had taken the divorce surprisingly hard. Mostly because I stopped attending social gatherings entirely. The truth was less dramatic. I was simply busy. Busy finalizing LLC paperwork under my maiden name. Busy negotiating office leases. Busy learning how peaceful life becomes once you stop performing emotional labor for someone determined not to value it. Then on June 11th at exactly 8:43 p.m., Daniel called for the first time in nearly 7 weeks. Not because he missed me. Because he needed my help understanding why several longtime clients had suddenly followed me to the consulting firm I hadn't publicly announced yet. I almost didn't answer Daniel's call that night because I was sitting cross-legged on the floor of my unfinished office suite surrounded by open cardboard boxes, eating Thai takeout directly from the container while contractors installed smoked glass panels outside the conference room. And for the first time in years, my life finally felt quiet in a way that didn't hurt. His name appeared on my screen at 8:43 p.m. sharp, and I remember staring at it while neon reflections from the parking garage flickered across the windows behind me, wondering how someone could disappear from your emotional world so completely in less than 3 months. When I finally answered, there was no apology, no hesitation, just Daniel's familiar executive tone sharpened by irritation. "Did you recruit Martin Ellis?" he asked immediately, referring to one of the hospital administrators from his firm's largest healthcare account. I looked across the room at the signed contracts sitting inside a Navy portfolio beside my laptop, and realized he genuinely believed business loyalty belonged to him automatically, as if my years of strategy work had merely been decorative support for his career. "Martin contacted me himself," I said calmly, which was technically true. What I didn't tell him was that Martin had called 2 weeks earlier after hearing through industry contacts that I was launching my own operational consulting company focused on healthcare retention systems, and during lunch at the Gage on Wacker Drive, he admitted half their executive board trusted my analysis more than Daniel's presentations because I understood people before numbers. Daniel went quiet for several seconds after I answered, and in 17 years of marriage, I learned silence frightened him more than confrontation because it gave him nothing to control. "You could have at least told me what you were doing," he finally muttered, sounding less angry than unsettled. I nearly laughed at the hypocrisy of a man who left divorce papers beside an espresso machine demanding transparency from the woman he abandoned, but instead I told him I had another meeting starting soon and ended the call before he could recover his composure. The next morning, I arrived at my office at 6:20 a.m. carrying paint samples and financial reports, only to find a bouquet of white roses waiting outside the temporary reception desk with a handwritten card that read, "I never wanted us to become enemies, Daniel." I threw them away before my assistant arrived because flowers from guilty men always appear right around the moment consequences become expensive. By July, rumors about Daniel and Ava had started circulating quietly through their social circle. Apparently the glamorous downtown relationship looked less cinematic once real life entered the frame. Ava disliked how often he traveled. Daniel disliked how frequently she posted private moments online for attention. Their arguments reportedly became public enough that another couple left a rooftop dinner early after Ava accused him of still obsessing over his ex-wife, in front of investors. None of this brought me satisfaction the way people assume revenge should. Mostly, it confirmed something I had understood months earlier. Relationships built on ego collapse under pressure because admiration is not the same thing as loyalty. Meanwhile, my own life was expanding faster than I could process. On July 18th, I signed the lease for a permanent office on the 23rd floor of the Halstead Building downtown, after securing contracts with 4 regional healthcare networks worth nearly $1.8 million combined over 2 years. I hired 3 analysts, opened a second business account, and finally replaced the cracked gold wedding band indentation on my finger with a thin platinum ring I bought myself after closing my largest deal. Then came the email that changed everything. At 9:11 p.m. on August 2nd, an executive recruiter forwarded me confidential information showing Daniel's firm was preparing internal layoffs after losing multiple healthcare accounts, including 2 that had transferred directly to my company. And suddenly, for the first time since he left, I understood why he had started calling again. The first time Daniel came to my new office, he arrived 34 minutes early because he always believed showing up before everyone else made him look powerful. But desperation changes the energy people carry, and by then even his confidence looked exhausted around the edges. It was September 14th, raining hard enough to blur the city skyline behind the glass walls of the Halstead building, and I was inside conference room B reviewing quarterly retention projections with my analysts when my assistant Lena quietly entered holding an iPad against her chest. "Your ex-husband is downstairs," she whispered carefully, the way people speak inside hospitals before delivering difficult news. I looked through the conference room windows toward the reception area where employees moved calmly between desks beneath warm pendant lighting I had chosen myself 6 weeks earlier, and for a strange second, I remembered standing in our old kitchen while Daniel explained that Ava made him feel alive again, as if I had somehow become background furniture inside my own marriage. "Tell security he can wait," I said without emotion before returning to the presentation. The meeting continued another 47 minutes because, unlike Daniel, I had learned that real power rarely announces itself dramatically. When I finally stepped into the elevator lobby downstairs, he was standing near the marble security desk holding a soaked umbrella and wearing the same navy wool coat he used to wear during investor dinners, except now it hung loosely on his frame like something borrowed from a healthier version of himself. He smiled the moment he saw me, but it collapsed quickly after realizing I wasn't approaching him with anger or heartbreak or even curiosity, just professionalism. "You look different," he said quietly. I did. Not because of revenge body cliches or dramatic transformations, but because peace changes a woman's posture. My shoulders no longer carried the constant invisible tension of trying to preserve someone else's affection. "I have 12 minutes before my next meeting," I replied, glancing toward the security monitor where rain streaked across the building entrance behind him. Daniel exhaled heavily and rubbed his jaw before speaking again. "I made mistakes." There it was. The sentence men reach for once consequences become personal. He explained that Ava had moved out 3 weeks earlier after discovering financial problems inside his firm, though he framed it carefully, avoiding the obvious reality that relationships built during emotional affairs rarely survive ordinary hardship. He admitted several major clients had transferred away. Bonuses were frozen. Layoffs were coming. Then, after circling the conversation for nearly 10 minutes, he finally revealed why he was really there. "I need your help," he said softly. "Not I miss you. Not I hurt you. Help. Because even after abandoning me, humiliating me, and rebuilding his life publicly beside someone younger, some part of Daniel still believed I existed to stabilize the consequences of his decisions. I remember studying his face while people crossed the lobby around us carrying coffees and briefcases, completely unaware that the man standing beside the security desk had once made me feel disposable inside my own life. And the strangest thing was realizing he no longer intimidated me at all. "You told me I was past my prime," I said calmly. Daniel immediately looked down. "I didn't mean it like that. You meant it enough to leave." Silence stretched between us while rain hammered against the glass entrance doors behind him. Finally, he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I was stupid, Claire. I thought excitement was the same thing as happiness." The security guard glanced up briefly from his desk, sensing tension without understanding context. I could have humiliated Daniel right there. I could have listed every betrayal, every dismissive comment, every lonely dinner spent wondering why my husband looked through me instead of at me. But emotional women seek revenge through explosions. Exhausted women seek peace. "I don't hate you anymore," I told him honestly. "That's why this conversation is over." Then I handed him one of my company business cards because some endings become unforgettable specifically because they stay calm. 3 weeks after Daniel showed up at my office, I received a certified envelope from his attorney requesting revisions to our finalized divorce settlement because his financial position had changed substantially, following corporate restructuring at his firm, which was a polished legal way of saying the man who once lectured me about ambition was now trying to avoid selling his downtown condo to cover debt exposure. I remember reading the letter at 6:48 a.m., inside the airport lounge at O'Hare while waiting for a flight to Boston to finalize a partnership with Northeast Medical Alliance, and instead of anger, I felt something far more unsettling: distance. The kind that forms when someone who once controlled your emotional climate slowly becomes irrelevant to it. 8 months earlier, Daniel had walked out believing he was escaping a woman whose value had expired quietly with age and routine. Now I was reviewing expansion contracts worth more than our entire marital assets, while his life unraveled in small, public stages nobody could hide forever. Mutual friends stopped mentioning Ava entirely after October because apparently she had moved to Miami with a fitness entrepreneur she met during a luxury wellness retreat, which would have sounded poetic if it hadn't been so painfully predictable. But the real shift happened during the annual Healthcare Leadership Gala on November 19th, the same event Daniel once attended while introducing me merely as my wife, before abandoning me near cocktail tables to entertain investors. This year my company sponsored one of the keynote panels, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I arrived alone without feeling incomplete. I wore a black silk gown with structured shoulders, my hair pinned back simply, no dramatic revenge makeover in sight, because confidence becomes most dangerous when it no longer asks for attention. Halfway through the evening, while discussing operational strategy with a hospital CEO near the ballroom entrance, I noticed Daniel standing across the room beside the bar, watching me with the expression people wear when they suddenly understand the cost of their own choices too late to reverse them. He looked older than 46 now, tired around the eyes, smaller somehow, not because life had destroyed him completely, but because regret had finally replaced ego, and regret ages people faster than stress ever could. Several executives approached me throughout the night congratulating me on the rapid growth of my firm, after an industry article named us one of the fastest rising healthcare consulting groups in the Midwest. And each time someone shook my hand, I saw Daniel glance away briefly like the visibility of my success physically hurt him. Near the end of the gala, he approached quietly while a jazz trio played near the stage and waiters cleared champagne glasses from nearby tables. "Congratulations," he said carefully, almost formally. "You built something incredible." It was probably the most honest sentence he had spoken to me in years. I thanked him politely and prepared to leave, but before I could step away, he asked the question I think he had really been carrying since the day he left. "Did you start becoming successful because of what I did?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering because the truth mattered. "No," I said softly. "I became successful because I finally stopped building my life around someone else's approval." He nodded slowly after that, like a man hearing the final line of a story he should have understood much earlier. Then he stepped aside and watched me walk toward the ballroom exit alone, surrounded by executives, investors, and opportunities he never imagined I could create without him. And for the first time since the divorce, I finally understood something clearly. The greatest revenge is not making someone suffer after they underestimate you. It's becoming someone they can never reach again. People always expect revenge to look loud. They expect screaming matches, public humiliation, dramatic confessions, or some perfectly scripted moment where the person who hurt you falls apart in front of everyone. But real power rarely looks like that. Sometimes it looks like waking up one morning and realizing the person who broke your heart no longer controls your peace. Daniel thought leaving me for someone younger would prove he still mattered. What actually happened was much quieter and far more permanent. He forced me to build a life that no longer required his approval to feel valuable. 8 months after walking out of our marriage, he stood outside my office asking for another chance while I held the career, confidence, and emotional clarity I used to beg him to notice when we were still together. And the truth is, by then, I didn't need revenge anymore because my life had already become the answer. If you've ever stayed silent while people underestimated you, if you've ever been made to feel invisible by someone who benefited from your loyalty, subscribe. Because some stories aren't about heartbreak. They're about what happens after a woman finally remembers her worth.